Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on responding to and preventing adversity and trauma in Wales. As you can see, it's quite sunny here in Wales, and it's also the afternoon for us, so good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. What we're going to do is a presentation between the three of us, so myself, Vicky Jones, who you can see, and Anne-Marie Newbury. And really grateful if people could put any questions that they have in the chat function and the Q&A section, because we'll be able to pick those up at the end. So have a think as you go along. Chat's welcome, but questions would be really great. And I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to do those. So what we'll do is we'll start with just introducing ourselves so that you know who we are. So I'm Jo Hopkins, sitting in a shaft of sunlight, which will move, I'm sure. And I'm the Programme Director for Adverse Childhood Experiences, Criminal Justice and Violence Prevention in Public Health Wales. And we're actually part of something called the WHO Collaborating Centre for Investment in Health and Wellbeing. So I had the privilege really of leading a couple of programmes of work in Wales over the last few years that have looked specifically at adverse childhood experiences and how we can learn more about what they are, the impact of them, but also then what we need to do in practice to really make a difference to people's lives. So I'll tell you a bit more about those individual programmes as we go through. But I've been director of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Support Hub and the Early Action Together programme, which is the Police and Partners one. Before that, many years in the civil service in the UK government, which has given me experience across a number of different sectors, but particularly in policing. So really pleased to be able to bring all of this together in such an exciting way. So I'll hand over to Anne-Marie, if you'd like to introduce yourself, Anne-Marie.
I'm Anne-Marie Newbury and I am the Violence Prevention Outcomes Officer. So I work within Public Health Wales in the same directorate as Jo, but working with the dedicated Violence Prevention Unit, which I've been working in for the last year. And then before that, I worked on the Early Action Together programme, which we'll talk about today. And then prior to that, I worked on the initial programme that led into the Early Action Together programme, which is the Police Innovation Fund project. Vicky?
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you. Vicky, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
I will. Good morning or good afternoon to everybody. I'm Vicky Jones. I'm actually the North Wales lead for the Adverse Childhood Experiences Hub here in Wales. Similarly to Anne-Marie, my background has come from the Early Action Together programme, where I was working with North Wales Police around that, and we'll talk about that a little bit further. But largely my background has been working in substance misuse, which of course is not in isolation. So it's lovely to be here to share some of the experiences and work that we've done in Wales.
Thank you, Vicky. We ought to really say Prynawn da, wouldn't we? There's a little bit of Welsh thrown in for our international colleagues. But anyway, so let's begin then and start our presentation. And as I say, please do join in. It's great to have you all with us and to put your questions and comments in the chat. So as I said, our talk this afternoon is thinking about how we respond to ACEs and to trauma. And I think, you know, one of the key aspects of what we want to talk about this afternoon is really to get across how we in Wales have developed a shared vision and a shared ambition to make Wales a trauma-informed nation. So that's across services, it's across organisations, it's across our communities, and ultimately it's about our Welsh society, all understanding what we mean, all pushing in the same direction, and all seeking to achieve a common outcome. And after I've done that brief introductory section, what we'll do then is hand over to Vicky Jones, who's going to take us through what a trauma-informed approach actually is. There's a lot of discussion at the moment, and I've just come from a session where we touched upon this with colleagues from Ireland. What does it actually mean to be trauma-informed? And in our case, having understood that, what does it look like in Wales? So Vicky will take us through some of the examples we have of good work that we've been doing in the ACE Support Hub and also the work of the Early Action Together programme. And then Anne-Marie is going to come along and give us a real sense of how we've done something we think has really brought about national transformation. So looking at these trauma-informed practices, now we understand what they are and how we've managed to embed them into the criminal justice system. So this isn't about just developing resources that people can tick a box to say that they've had training or have been on a course or whatever. How do we really make sure that what we are learning and what we're developing becomes part and parcel of everyday life for organisations, for communities, and as I said, for society? And then I'll just conclude really with a summary of our journey and the learning that we've had, which will be brought to life by Vicky and Anne-Marie, and to really think about, well, what next then, in terms of, if we are striving for a trauma-informed nation, what more might we need to do? And I hope that all of this will help others to understand a little bit more about the good practice and the learning that we've developed in Wales, because our ambition is to really share it, but also to provoke that conversation that we want to have today around experiences that you might have that either supports, informs, or could help us to achieve our journey here in Wales. So let's start then with my brief overview around what it is that we're trying to achieve. So if we have a shared vision and a shared ambition, I think that really does give you a sense of how we are collectively striving in Wales to develop a trauma-informed nation. And it's really important, I think, to understand our context politically here, because we pride ourselves in saying that we work in partnership. It's one of the things that you'll find that many people who are presenting at this conference will be really, really clear on, is that we have a great partnership working environment here in Wales. And I'll talk a bit more about some of the things that underpin that in a minute. But one of the key aspects of this is that we have a Welsh government who is responsible for things like education, for housing, for social services, but other things such as policing and criminal justice are actually the responsibility of the UK government. So like some of the other devolved nations in the UK, we have this kind of, well, I wouldn't say struggle, but we do need to think carefully about how we implement our processes and our policies in Wales to understand that responsibility, but also to ensure it doesn't get in the way. Because one of the key aspects of this is that people in our society don't sit there and think, oh, is this a Welsh government owned area, or is this a UK government owned area? They just want to be able to access the service and the support that they need. So it's really important for us that we have that shared ambition across both the UK and the Welsh government policy areas, and we work together to achieve what the people of Wales actually need to have in terms of our trauma-informed nation. So our shared vision really, oh, sorry, Vicky, could you just go back? I'm quite finished on that one. Our shared vision is bringing together a number of programmes that are operating in this space. So I mentioned the ACE Support Hub. That is the hub, the part of the programme that's funded by the Welsh Government. Then we have the Early Action Together programme, which was funded by the UK Government and the Home Office to bring police and partners together to transform systems. And now we have the Violence Prevention Unit, which is also looking to really understand what prevention means in our landscape in Wales, and to think about that early intervention and what works. So between the three programmes and the wider work going on in Wales, of which there is a lot, and the discussions we're having around policy, what we're trying to do is really kind of boil it down to these areas where we absolutely are all striving in the same direction. So breaking the cycle of adverse childhood experiences, developing a competent, confident and compassionate workforce. This is not just about the people that we are working for or serving or providing support to. It's about ourselves, our organisations, our staff. Working together to prevent violence through a public health approach, and I'll talk more about that in a second. Thinking about those structural determinants of violence, abuse and trauma and health inequality. What is it that's the root causes of the stuff that we're seeing? And fundamentally, I think, enabling a whole system response to vulnerability. So taking these trauma-informed approaches, but thinking about it at a systemic level and making sure anything that we do is understood through that lens. So the three areas that all of these programs have really focused on is that prevention piece, really understanding, you know, that adverse childhood experiences have occurred in children's lives and how do we stop them happening in the first place. But when they do, getting support in early, so that we're able to support children who are experiencing ACEs so that they don't have to continue to experience harm and get the support they need. And that, you know, relates to the families that they live in and adults and everybody else. But actually we have to accept, don't we, that at the moment, you know, there are difficulties in all of our lives. And actually one of the things that we can do is think about what are the mitigating factors for that. So promoting and building a resilience around our communities so that they can access support in the right way, the things that make us able to cope with whatever life throws at us, and really sort of determining what they are and how we can embed them in our society. Thanks, Vicky. And just wanted to touch a little bit more on what we talk about when we mean adverse childhood experiences, because I think commonly people have understood that there's a wealth of research now, starting with the original research that came out of the States with Felici and Anders, but also we've had our own research here in Wales, which we'll talk about in a minute, that talks about the 10 sort of household ACEs, as we call them, things that occur in the home, in that environment, and which we understand as ACEs from the description in the research. But it's also really important to think about the adverse community environment. I think now more than ever, we're beginning to really understand through the COVID experience globally about inequalities in our society and how a light has really been shone on that. So things like poverty, discrimination, disruption, lack of opportunity, violence, poor housing, all of these things are things that in our environment that exacerbate and cause that kind of cause and effect between our adverse childhood experiences and things that are going on in wider society. So we really want to understand that as well, and to look at those root causes, to look at those wider determinants, and to think about how collectively we can really kind of look at those prevention aspects, early intervention and mitigation in that totality of our experience. Thank you, Vicky. So as I said, in Wales, one of the things that you'll hear quite frequently is the strength of our partnership working, but also we have something in our legislation that really helps to enable us to be perhaps more progressive in the way that we can structurally move forward. So there's a number of things, both UK-wide and Wales-specific, that really have provided policy building blocks for the work that we've been doing here. That's not to say you can't do this if you don't have these things. I think we would all agree that they have been really helpful in being able to take forward some thinking around not only this year or funding cycles for next year, but actually for the next generation in some cases, to be really thinking about what we do now and how that will change the lives of our children and the children after that. So let's start with the UK picture just to start with. Things like the policing vision for 2025. Getting something that is a national structure that enables us to think about what would we want policing to look like 5 years ahead at the time when this was being developed, and what does that mean in terms of how we operate, in terms of how we behave, and in terms of what we want to see as outcomes. So having something that stretches to that level at a UK wide, but England and Wales, of course, in terms of policing responsibility and criminal justice, is a helpful framework to be operating in. And within that, then, there are specific guidelines and plans and actions that flow out of that and come from the College of Policing, which we're very lucky to have, which enables us to understand more about what are the sorts of things that need to be put out in terms of instructions and guidelines to help us to be able to work in the way that we want to. So we have that mechanism, we have that ability. But what I wanted to really highlight really is in terms of Wales, we also have two pieces of legislation that I think have changed the game for us. Not least because when I was working in the UK government, I looked at the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It was passed across my desk for comment, and I looked at it and I thought, my goodness, we're never going to get legislation through that has pictures or has goals. I'm used to really dry legal documents that most people don't bother to read past the second page. Here was something that was really standing out to me as we want to transform, we want to do something, we want to put goals in legislation. And I was taken aback by how transformational it really was. What it actually does in practice is it's enabling public service to come together in a way that wasn't necessarily possible before. So people work with partnerships, we often talk about the strength of that, as I said, but it actually mandates partners to come together to think about structurally how they're going to operate, to work to that collective leadership, which is really important. And I think as well, that ability to look beyond a parliamentary cycle, to look into the future, has really enabled us to think about transforming systems, because we will have time to do it. And the other piece of legislation that's been really important as well is the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. So these two together, where you have specific legislation that allows you to think forward, to talk about generational change, and to talk about collaborating structurally in a way that you haven't been able before, has really enabled us to move forward with some of the stuff that we've been doing across the devolved and non-devolved landscape. And the last thing to mention, I think, is that ACEs and the work in Wales has also been a really key part of the Welsh Government's programme for government. We had last week the announcement that they've reviewed the ACES policy and are continuing to prioritise that, which is really great news. But in terms of our working relationship with police and criminal justice, that's underpinned with public health by a partnership agreement, which says that we will work together to take a public health approach in terms of justice and policing in Wales. So all of these things are really strong blocks to take us forward through the work that we want to achieve. Thank you, Vicky. So this slide just gives you a sense of some of the breadth and depth of those partnerships. We've got 4 police force areas in Wales. I would point out, though, that our population is relatively small. So whilst you might think 4 police force areas, that's quite a lot, actually we don't have a huge amount of people in comparison to some of the force areas that you might see in the wider UK. That said, we have quite a varied and diverse geographical spread and demographic, actually. So it's really important that we include all of those areas within the work that we do. And I've said before as well, looking at the diversity of organisations that operate in Wales, both in the devolved and non-devolved space. Our voluntary sector and third sector partners who do an amazing role to try and ensure that access to services for everybody in Wales, and our criminal justice partners in the wider sense of prisons, probation, youth justice, all of which have been brought together in the work that we've done with the Early Action Together programme. And similarly for the Violence Prevention Unit, having a core membership of key statutory agencies, but also making sure that there are associate members and other members that enable us to bring together everybody that needs to be collaborating in this space. So I've shown this slide before and people are, gosh, crikey, that's a lot. But actually, when you have that fundamental already in place in Wales, when you have that understanding of the value of working in this way, we've been able to kind of use that to drive forward the work that we want to do, which I think we'll be able to evidence through the rest of this presentation. Next slide, please, Vicky. So just before I hand over, just as a final slide from me to give you a starting point, one of the things that we really wanted to highlight in all the work that we're going to talk about this afternoon is the importance of a public health approach. Sometimes when we talk about some of the things that we've been doing, the public health approach aspect just kind of falls away a little bit. So we wanted to just put it front and centre before we start to go into more detail about these programmes, about what it is we actually mean, and in particular, in terms of this case, talking about violence prevention, talking about preventing ACEs and thinking about what we want to achieve as an outcome. So just to take you very quickly through what we mean, in terms of a public health approach, we need to start with looking at what is it that we're trying to fix, what is the problem, and how do we understand what that problem is. So looking at surveillance, taking an epidemiological, what I managed to say, approach, and really trying to get to the nub of what is it that we're trying to understand and to do something about. And then from there, we need to think about what the causes of these things are. So looking for and identifying those risk factors and protective factors so that we understand what are the things that make stuff happen and what are the things that stop stuff happening. So we get a real sense of what it is that we need to work with. And then when we think about doing something about it, what is it that works? And I find this really interesting because one of the key areas for me when we think about this is if we're developing and evaluating interventions, sometimes the braver decisions to say, this isn't working, we need to stop doing it, particularly if there's been a significant amount of funding invested in it. And I think that, for me, stands out in a public health approach, that you're able to evidence the decisions that you take and take brave ones when things don't work and they're not achieving what you want them to do. And then from there, thinking about what it is that you can take forward and scaling that up so that it becomes an effective policy at a broader scale. It's not just a programme that's here today, gone tomorrow. This is about implementing, sustaining and embedding something that will make a difference. So that is really what we're talking about. It's not more complicated. I'm sure it is more complicated than that, but that is the nub of it. That's what we talk about when we say a public health approach. Defining the problem, establishing risk and protective factors, identifying what works and implementing it. And in terms of doing that, in the programmes that we're going to talk about, we're talking about addressing trauma and vulnerability across the policing and criminal justice system. And as we've discussed, we've got examples of an All Wales national programme. We've got taking a public health approach to policing within that, looking at that lack of early intervention and prevention and really kind of understanding that and addressing it, and then crucially taking forward something that develops a whole systems response to vulnerability with police and partner organisations. So I hope that gives you a grounding in terms of what we want to talk about this afternoon. I'm going to hand over to Vicky and be in charge of the chat. So please do put some questions in as we go along. And Vicky, over to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jo. So I'm going to talk to you really about what is a trauma-informed approach and actually what that has looked like and continues to look like in Wales. So this is really our ambition, Wales as a trauma and adverse childhood experience informed nation, and we shorten that to TRACE. So trauma and ACE is TRACE, and we have been for some time really on this journey, and I'll be presenting some of the work that we've done in this space and the impact that this work has so far had. But before I do, I think it's fair to say that we're really alive to an ongoing debate about the language that we use and how widely understood that is. So effectively, the big question that we're addressing is actually, what does that mean? What does trauma and ACE informed mean? So as you will all know, it's not about treating trauma and symptoms. And when I refer to the term throughout this presentation, what I mean is a universal approach that anyone can take, actually recognising that adversity and trauma are a possibility for anyone. And it's all about promoting those opportunities for well-being, healing and recovery, with everyone having a role. And as you all know, this is underpinned by 5 core principles of choice, collaboration, empowerment in helping individuals recognise their strengths and resilience factors and building on these, and then prioritising physical and emotional safety that ultimately builds trusted relationships. And we know that people respond incredibly well when they feel safe, empowered, trusted and connected. And we really can't underestimate that. So on an individual level, what we mean is that a trace-informed person understands absolutely that people are shaped by their life experiences, and they are able to recognise the signs and behaviours of trauma and are able to respond by engaging in a different way with kindness and compassion at the heart. So everybody's heard this before. We should all consider what's happened rather than what's wrong and reframe the way in which we engage with people, as I said. But do we know why that is? Well, clearly on the left-hand side here, what's wrong with you evokes that blame, shame and punishment, but actually reframing that to a kind of what's happened actually kind of evokes a much more understanding and a much more nurturing response, which promotes really the ability to heal. And Dr. Karen Treisman kind of summarises this really well, I think, when she says that every interaction is an intervention. And I guess the importance of that is actually that can be the difference between somebody engaging in a healing pathway or a more destructive one. So let me tell you a little bit more about what we're doing in Wales to really operationalise this approach. Well, firstly, from an organisational development point of view, we've created a knowledge and skills framework, which is aimed at everyone and aimed at everyone in really becoming trauma and ACE informed. And we've also devised a trauma and ACE informed toolkit for organisations to use as a guided process to becoming trauma and ACE informed. And that really kind of explores the principles of trauma-informed practice across a number of domains. So it looks at governance and leadership and organisational culture. It looks at policies and procedures. It looks at workforce training and support. And we know that training is not enough to evoke transformational change. And this is what the toolkit was devised to really lead to that transformational change at every level. It even touches upon physical environment and clearly monitoring and evaluation. The toolkit incorporates a self-assessment tool as well to support organisations to really reflect on what they're already doing and identify then those areas for improvement. And then in addition, we've created lots of different training products. And I guess all of this has really kind of been built on the work that we've done across all of these sectors that you can see here. And I think this probably illustrates the real breadth of the sectors that we've worked across here in Wales. And kind of you know, if you're to look at kind of housing and homelessness, youth services, youth justice, criminal justice, which Anne-Marie will talk about, these are all the areas, and I'm going to really just shine a spotlight on some of those areas just to give you a flavour of the work that's been taken forward. So I'll start with that with education, because obviously that's been of crucial importance for us. And our ambition has been really for every school in Wales to be strong, inclusive and trauma informed, helping children to flourish and have the best start in life. So right back in 2017, we actually developed an ACE and trauma informed whole schools approach, which was kind of broken down into 3 key areas really. The first was around kind of a readiness tool for schools to be able to use to track their existing progress. And then there was the delivery of training in 2 phases. And that was developed in collaboration really with educational psychology colleagues. And first of all, looking at education and awareness, but then actually helping school staff to respond to ACEs and trauma in the classroom, to take that trauma-informed approach and to prioritise staff well-being and building resilience and protective factors. And this was aimed actually at all school staff, not just teaching staff. And the yellow box here on the left actually just tells you about the reach of that. So that has gone out to 2/3 of Welsh schools. We've now engaged actually with 18 out of 22 local authorities. And we know that from evaluation, and this was evaluated really heavily, that actually there was improved staff confidence, better understanding of the underlying causes of behaviour in the classroom, much improved communication and support to children experiencing ACEs and trauma. And staff really kind of described creating safe spaces and generally being more responsive to young people when they sought support. And actually one school in particular reported a 47% reduction in exclusions in the year post-training. So we also know that now ACEs and trauma-informed approaches form part of our Estyn inspection, which is the Welsh equivalent of the UK Ofsted. And actually a recent thematic review set out clearly the difference that this approach has made in schools and actually corroborated the findings of the research. But ultimately, there have been better outcomes for children and staff as a result of the work. And really our work with education has not just been about the schools, it's been about the community that the school serves and support. So for example, a key element of the Early Action Together programme in Gwent was actually about developing the relationships between policing and schools, and in particular the Headley Bark programme, which gave children the opportunity to learn more about the police, to develop trust and educate others. And actually more recently, we've been developing training and support for our early years settings, so in preschool settings. And then we've actually just adapted that offer and that training for parents as well. So it's also important really to ensure that trauma and ACE-informed approaches don't just end at the school gate. And I'm sure everybody here would agree with that. And we actually are able to adopt them across further education and higher education, and actually that they're sustainable for our future teaching staff. So I'm really pleased to say that our training now is actually delivered to PGCE education students becoming teachers. It's now a core part of their syllabus. And it's also delivered within level 2 qualifications for youth work and embedded in health and social care qualifications. So this is all about kind of informing the workforce of tomorrow. I'm also kind of really pleased to say that Glyndŵr University in Wrexham has agreed to be our first pilot in the UK to becoming a trauma and ACE-informed university. And actually we're exploring parallel work streams with further education colleges, really to ensure that education is a trace-informed sector at every level. And really building on this work, I'll work with the youth work and youth justice sector to raise awareness of ACEs and their impact on behaviour. And training has been provided to practitioners across youth and youth justice with a range of tools really to support resilience and self-regulation. And the youth justice sector have also adopted an enhanced case management approach which for working with their young people, which has just been evaluated with really, really positive outcomes around that. Sport is also, of course, key to supporting resilience and protective factors in young people, and understanding that we've had about 20,000 coaches across Wales we've been working with key partners, including the Welsh Rugby Union and Sports Wales, to develop an ACEs and sports training package, which is now currently being delivered and rolled out. So really, really exciting work across all these sectors, really. When we look at the work that we've done in housing, for example, we have worked with partners to develop and deliver 3 training programmes to housing colleagues across Wales, and that's included trauma-informed approaches, psychologically informed environments and reflective practice. And the PI approach, or the PATH approach as it's interchangeably known, it really recognised that many of the behaviours displayed by the homeless population, so for example, self-harm, antisocial behaviour, potentially substance misuse, are all behaviours as a result of trauma. And then it kind of devised 5 elements to help staff work much more effectively with people who have those complex and multiple needs, and actually changing the way in which we understand and tackle the behaviour that leads to homelessness. And you can see these here. So relationships underpin that, the physical environment and those social spaces are absolutely crucial, and the psychological framework to enable that reflective, thoughtful and compassionate culture within the service, and ensure that kind of ongoing cycle of improvement, really. So in terms of the impact that that's had, well, actually 1 year of this approach being taken forward in a particular homeless hostel, you can see there that the figures were significant in terms of impact. So if we to look at demand reduction, for example, ambulance call-outs were reduced by 80%, police call-outs were reduced by 70%, hospital admissions were down, serious incidents were down. And you know, perhaps more importantly, in terms of service user outcomes, actually positive move-ons increased by 250%, and really showing that people and services are better off as a result of us taking trauma-informed approaches. Okay, so as well as our work with professionals then, we've also worked to connect with the public through our Time to Be Kind campaign, of which now we're on our 2nd phase. And the goal this year for us has really been to drive awareness of adversity and to support young people and adults who've experienced increased difficulties over the last year. And haven't we all experienced that over the last year? But what we're trying to do is encourage kindness throughout the nation, really. And this is our campaign, which is running from the 16th of March through to the 16th of April. And the campaign film, which I'll show you now, is actually being aired on TV. And it's also going out through various social media channels. And we're also pleased to say that it's been independently evaluated to measure the impact it has on people. And we're really excited about that. So let me show you.
Okay guys, this next question then, on question 4, it says we have to compare and contrast question 3 and question 2 to get the answer, but then
Sorry about that, guys.
Is everything alright over there, Gav?
Yeah, no, it's all fine.
right, we'll finish the rest tomorrow then, okay? See you guys.
Tra. Later, Gav.
Get in. Just a quick one before you go. How's your dad? I haven't heard from him in a while.
Yeah, he's not doing the best. Actually, he just lost his job.
Oh, get in. I'm sorry to hear about that. I'll give him a call later on just to check in. Remember, if you want to talk about anything, me and James are here, okay?
Yeah, Gav, I'll give you a text later, alright?
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
So we're really proud of the Time to Be Kind campaign, and it's really relevant. I think this is all of the way in which we're working at the moment, and it's having an impact on everybody. We're asking people through the campaign to really share their kindness stories, so that we can really kind of take a look at Wales as a kinder and more trauma-informed nation. So this is the closest so far that we have come really to whole systems change on a national level. I'm just struggling to move this on. There we go. So we have come close, but actually we have an aspiration for trauma-informed communities, and effectively this is how it looks. So we have achieved a lot on our journey so far to becoming a trace-informed nation, but we want to go further to really enable our communities to be trace informed and to support all members of society to thrive across Wales. And we are at the start of the journey, but actually we know that this approach has never been more important. The current kind of COVID-19 pandemic is a collective adversity, potentially a collective trauma that we're all experiencing in different ways. Existing levels of ACEs, trauma and vulnerability are being amplified. Restrictions have meant limited opportunities to build and maintain resilience factors, especially where home is the source of adversity and trauma. But actually what we've seen is, despite all of these negative experiences, we've seen much progressive action. Communities have come together to support one another in a variety of innovative ways. We've seen much resourcefulness, and we've seen huge strengths for us to really celebrate and for us to harness. And it's timely, and we want to use this experience of collective trauma as an opportunity for transformation to enable a trauma-informed movement here in Wales. And it is complex, and no one organisation has the answer, but I think our sector-specific work really puts us in good stead, and it provides a really wonderful opportunity for us to take collaborative action for a really true whole system approach. So the work is largely conceptual at the moment, but there are a number of issues for us to consider, really. We want to build on that Time to Be Kind campaign, using it as a platform for communication and with key messaging for the public around everyone having the ability to make changes to people's lives. We want to engage with the communities we serve. This is crucial. And in doing so, we need to explore the language that we're using, make it more accessible, and help the public to take ownership and engage about its simplicity. We don't want this to be done in isolation or as a bolt-on, and it is about building into what already exists and actually kind of recognising our community assets and working with them. And in that, we need a really, really clear community definition. And I guess for me, this is about grassroots action with and through our peers, recognising that we all belong to a community and we can all practice this type of approach, because actually the impact of that could be significant. It's not deficit-based, it's strength-based, and resilience has to be front and centre, because we know that resilience and protective factors are the biggest mitigating factor we've got in terms of tackling and preventing adverse childhood experiences and adversity. And actually, everybody holds a responsibility or an ability within their hands to be able to do something about that, and we need to convey that to the public and to help people take that forward. We need to upscale and we need to adapt all of the work that we've done to date, our sector-specific work, all of the resources we've developed, and actually that needs to be developmental, dynamic, and certainly for the community aspects, organic. And this surely for us, I think, has to be at the heart of post-COVID recovery planning, given our collective experience of adversity. So this quote here from the Resilience film really kind of summarises the power of this, and it has really resonated with me every time that I've watched the film. If we put the knowledge of ACEs and trauma into the hands of the public, they will create very wise decisions. So it's fair to say there is certainly still more to do. And in the words of kind of Charlie Maxey here, who has written The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse, and has been providing a lot of comfort to people throughout COVID, we've got a long way to go, sighed the boy. Yes, but look how far we've come, said the horse. And it really is for us to kind of reflect on that. But in order to kind of achieve true transformation and systems change, we've got to make this everybody's business. But I guess just imagine, though, what we could and what this could look like if we can really join the dots of this work and ensure work that actually transcends those organisational boundaries, then we will truly create a trauma-informed nation. And at this point, I will hand over to Anne-Marie, who's going to talk a little bit more about the criminal justice work, because I haven't provided a focus on that. I might have just mentioned it. So over to you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Vicky. As Vicky just said, I'm going to talk about some of the work we've delivered as part of the National Programme of Police and Partner Transformation in Wales, which is largely funded by the Home Office. Next slide. So this very much started in 2016, where we're looking at a lot of the data. We could see that police and crime and control data was demonstrating that the majority of demand placed on police was for public safety, welfare and vulnerability. So in 2016, we carried out some research to better understand how vulnerabilities was being policed. We carried out some ethnography with policing teams as well as some interviews and focus groups with police, social care, and also the public. We also analysed police safeguarding notifications which were submitted by the police to local authority social care teams. And what we learned from this research was that traditional policing systems, processes and practices were not suitable to respond to vulnerability related demand, and that also there was a need for training on vulnerability and other related subjects in policing such as mental health. Looking at the safeguarding notifications, we could see that within a single police force in Wales, which was South Wales Police Force, and I know Joe mentioned about the 4 different police forces, but for us, South Wales is the largest police force. It covers only 10% of Wales, but it serves 43% of the population of Wales, so a very densely populated area. And what we could see was that there was a high number of referrals being submitted within a period of a year, which was 61,590. But of those, the majority were logged and closed without any further action. Only 3.2% of referrals for children were being actioned into a care and support plan for those children. Next slide. So looking at it from a public health perspective then, and as Joe mentioned this, we adopted a public health approach to policing and vulnerability. The Home Office funded 2 programmes of work for us here in Wales, and that was the Police Innovation Fund project, which was 2016 to 2018, and that looked at establishing and testing ACE and trauma-informed responses to vulnerability. And then also the Police Transformation Programme, which was the Early Action Together programme, and that was 2018, and it's still ongoing to date. And that programme looked to roll out and scale up approaches Wales-wide. So looking at defining the problem, Joe has talked about the ACEs research, and this very much provided valuable insight into the underlying causes of vulnerability, and also highlighted the dose-response relationship between ACEs and poor outcomes in later life, such as health harm and behaviour, crime, victimisation and poor health, and also demonstrated how resilience interacts with harm, looking at the risk and protective factors. So the research highlighted to us that often crime does not operate in isolation to vulnerability, and that the police have an integral role in addressing childhood adversity at the earliest opportunity to mitigate the impact they have and subsequently the risk of negative outcomes in later life. Next slide. So thinking about the 5th level of the public health approach, which is scaling up, this is the approach we've taken in adopting when the programme moved from the initial police innovation project to the national programme of transformation, and then moved to the whole systems approach. So this included the development of the evaluation framework to enable us to understand what works and for whom on a national level. So the early intervention programme and the knowledge that we gained from the ACEs research around resilience provided the foundation for the Early Action Together programme, and key findings and recommendations were feeding directly into the current national programme of work. So it allowed us for us to upscale on a national level with further understanding, developing and testing more effective and efficient systems and processes in responding to vulnerability. So in order to deliver the Early Action Together programme, just a bit of context for you, each of the 4 Welsh police forces established a local delivery team, which was made up of a senior ranking police officer. So for most forces that was at a superintendent level. We also had in each force a partnership lead, which was experienced at working across different sectors and engaging with partner agencies. In our case, for North Wales, we had Vicky, who was the partner lead. There was also project management and support roles in each force. Also, each local delivery team had been set up to work exclusively on the Early Action Together programme, so they weren't sort of pulled off in different directions to work on different projects or to respond to different operational roles. This allowed, having these different teams across each force allowed for the programme to be adapted to the local needs of each force area and local communities, and allow us to build into existing systems and processes and allow that to be adapted to each area. So changes in development of new systems, processes and interventions in regards to identifying vulnerability was evidenced by the research team, and a number of evaluations and research studies were carried out at both the national and local level to evidence the impact of the programme in line with the objectives that we had set out. So researchers worked directly with operational police and criminal justice staff to understand their experiences of working with vulnerable people, as well as partner agencies, and to capture the impact of the programme on knowledge, skills and practice, as well as identifying barriers to implementing change and to ensure what was delivered was supported by a robust evidence base. Data was captured through a varied means. So we did interviews and questionnaires. We also did case studies, and we collated data from police forces, such as demand data and wellbeing data. And we also looked at quality assurance processes. Findings and recommendations from many aspects of the evaluation was carried out as part of the Early Action Together programme, continue to feed into the programme for us to keep modifying, improving it, for it to be as strong as it can be. Next slide. So looking at what was delivered against sort of our initial learning from the ethnography research. So the research highlighted, as I said, the gaps in knowledge, skills and pathways to respond appropriately to vulnerability-related demand across police and partners. And it also highlighted challenges with cross or multi-agency working and a need for shared understanding of vulnerability across different services. And also a really key finding for us was that vulnerability-related demand, exposure to traumatic events, and the ability to take time to process these experiences were all having a negative impact on police officer wellbeing. So we implemented a number of different work streams to help address some of these issues. And one of the key sort of earliest things that we did was to establish an ACE coordinator service. And this was funded by the Early Action Together programme Home Office money, but it was set up and established in Barnardo's, which is in the UK, it's a children's charity. And the role of the service was to deliver ACEs training and then also to help embed the practice into operational activity. So that Adverse childhood training was delivered to police and partners, and these were delivered in a multi-agency group setting. So typically 20 officers to 5 multi-agency partners across different sectors: education, local authority and councils, sporting teams and organisations. And the ACEs training we also was delivered to criminal justice staff, so prison and probation staff in Wales. There was also bespoke public protection notification training. So this is police safeguarding referral training to upskill officers, ensuring that they fill those out really comprehensively and really highlight the risk within those referrals. We also did some work to enhance early help models. So we did set up some joint screening of the referrals that go into social care services, so that officers can continue to provide more information and help assess risk. There was also some co-locations of PCSOs and early help staff, and then we established some new pathways and referral processes. And then we also trialled some training for police officer wellbeing within Dyfed-Powys Police Force. Next slide. So just to summarise some of the learning from the evaluation, the ACEs training effectively developed police and partner understanding of ACEs and their impact on the life course, as well as influence individuals' behaviours. And across police, criminal justice and multi-agency partners, the training significantly increased the confidence working with vulnerable people and those who experience ACEs. And that delivering the training within a multi-agency setting provided important networking opportunities and allowed police and partners to share different perspectives and explore the roles and expectations of different agencies. From a referral perspective, the ACE training provided the knowledge and understanding to support officers in submitting safeguarding referrals. And as a result, there were improvements in the quality of safeguarding referrals, which provided a more descriptive insight into the risks identified, as well as better recording of consent and personal details, such as the child's school. There was also a reduction in referrals resulting in no further action due to more appropriate referrals being made with the information necessary to act on concerns. And there was an increase in referrals made directly to early help services for lower level concerns, not requiring safeguarding responses. So this reduced the demand on social services. But from an early health perspective, across the police forces, there was enhanced access to early intervention services for vulnerable people. And as we know, a very large proportion of police demand is responding to vulnerability, and as such, police are uniquely placed to act as a gateway to other services. So following the training, there was improvements in the interaction between police and vulnerable people with better communication and also questioning to explore individual needs. As a result, officers were able to determine whether safeguarding was needed or whether to signpost other services, and where necessary, submit referrals to other services on their behalf and with their consent. Joint screening of referrals with police and local authority allowed information to be shared and to better inform risk assessments and decision making on the most appropriate pathway for support. And as a result, more referrals were being directed straight to early help. and not to social services. And also the co-location of PCSOs within the early help hubs demonstrated positive outcomes, strengthening relationships between police and the community, and the police were able to provide support to address behaviours of children and respond to criminogenic needs. We're still working on understanding the cost benefits realisation for this work, but case studies provided by the police do suggest that incident response costs have been avoided as a result of the alternative early help pathways. And also we saw some positive improvements in staff well-being, and with a greater awareness of ACEs and impact they have on a personal level to officers. And also we've seen positive changes in officers' sense of self-control, as well as improvements in their overall mental well-being and reductions in levels of operational stress. And also the training that they received was considered to be done in a safe environment, with useful elements as cognitive behaviour therapy introduced to help them manage stress. So to conclude, the Early Action Together programme succeeded in raising awareness of ACEs among police and partners in Wales and allowed for a shared understanding of vulnerable people and also a common language to articulate those concerns. And there was improved knowledge, skills and confidence to help police to ensure that vulnerable people have access to timely support better suited to their needs. So as a result, the programme enabled more appropriate and proportionate responses to low-level vulnerability, more positive interactions between police and community, and allowed more individuals to be given the choice to receive intervention to address their needs at the earliest point. There were some challenges working practices and cultures. However, the programme demonstrates a number of key building blocks for successful transformation. Next slide. I was going to do a case study, but I didn't know if we got any time to do that. So I think maybe it'd be good if we kind of move along to Joe's end of the presentation.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. And I think, you know, as I said, there's lots of resources available for people who want to have a look at some of these case studies and things that we have developed. So I've put in the chat some of the websites you can have a look at. So I'm just going to conclude by just giving a brief summary of our journey and our learning up to this point, and to thank both Vicky and Anne-Marie for the input that they've done in this presentation. It's been really great to share with you what we have achieved so far. So if you can move to the next slide, please, Vicky. Oh, there we are. No, bit of a disco. So what we really want to kind of highlight in terms of where we're all trying to get to is that we have a Wales that has where vulnerable people receive the right help at the right time. We have one public service with one front door so that people are able to access support they need without having to go from pillar to post effectively. We want something that's efficient and effective in terms of our delivery. We want intergenerational cycles of adversity and crime to be broken. I think that's a really key aspect of this. And also we want something that helps us to create a healthy, prosperous, resilient and more equal population. This is about those wider determinants, as I picked up earlier. We understand the impact of ACEs. We understand better, I think, what we can all do to mitigate them and to put the right support in. But really, the fundamental issue here is tackling some of those structural root causes and overcome really at the end to be stronger and more cohesive in our communities. I think you've heard from both Vicky and Anne-Marie about the importance of engaging with community and with society. This is about a shift not only around how we conduct our practice, but it's also about attitudes, it's also about societal norms, it's also about all of us coming together. So whilst we have a range of activities which you can see on this slide where we really think that we've been able to do some things that have been converted into practice and then converted into outcomes, we still think that there is quite a lot more that we will still try to strive to do in this space. We talk a lot about green shoots. I think we're a bit further forward than green shoots. We've actually got some really strong evidence to back up some of the interventions that we've made. But I do think now that we need to think about how we scale these up so that they are truly transformational across systems and across society as a whole. So whilst we've got this knowledge and whilst we've got this understanding, we now need to embed and sustain it at a scale that you know really makes a transformational difference in Wales. Next slide, please, Vicky. Oh, we're going to fall over at the end now. There we go. So in terms of how we think we're going to take forward this ambition, so building on the success that we've had in the programmes that Vicky and Anne-Marie have described, and to continue that collaborative and partnership working that we're so proud of here in Wales. Really pleased to say that there is continued commitment from the Welsh Government and from the UK Government to continue to fund the ACE Support Hub and the Violence Prevention Unit particularly to continue their work into next year. So that's been really welcome. But it's not all about funding for programmes. What we really want to do is really get a focus on how we embed this in policy and strategy. And we've been talking for many years about prevention, but what does that actually mean in terms of a direction that's taken across governments? So really focusing on that in the months to come. Obviously we have, or maybe not obviously for some of you, we do have elections here in Wales in May. So some of this stuff has been committed to before that takes place, but of course we will need to see the outcome of those parliamentary elections. So we're hoping, and we understand that the commitment to this work will continue. We're really focusing on what works at a community level going forward. We've got a strong sense of how we can support organisations and sectors. We understand more about what might work in those environments, but we also know there's a lot of good work going on at grassroots level in towns and cities all around Wales that perhaps we haven't quite understood yet, we haven't tapped into. You know, people just going about their lives and doing great things but not really kind of shouting about it, because that's what happens, isn't it? So really getting an understanding of those sorts of grassroots what works. So a systematic review that will help us to do that. Continued work on our trace communities, you know, taking it up a level from working with institutions into working with third sector society, and continuing as well in terms of the justice work to really think about how we can embed all of our learning into the more structural governance systems that exist in Wales around criminal justice and around community safety, both of which are well established and both of which have core work streams now looking at a public health approach and really focusing in on what that means in terms of primary, secondary and tertiary interventions. And then finally, I think it's all about really now looking at what are the outcomes that we've got, what are the outcomes that we still need to realise, but really highlighting those tangible models that are making a difference. And as I said, once we understand what works, how do we then scale that up to a national level to really ensure that we are able to realise our ambition. And I think, Vicky, that might be the end. Here we are. So thanks ever so much to everybody to joining us today and for listening to us for quite some time. So I don't know if there's any questions that have come in. I know we're short of time now, but here are the websites anyway, and our Twitter handles and other ways to access information. So please do have a look at that if you're interested in our work. I've put them as we go along, as I say. I don't know if I don't think there is any particular questions. I'm sure everyone's desperate now for a cup of tea or a little break. So I'll just quickly pass to Vicky. Vicky, is there anything that you wanted to just say or highlight as a final word from your section?
I don't think so, Jo. I think if anybody has any questions, all of the details are there, and we'd be really happy for people to get in touch with us about the work. So thanks for listening, really. Okay, great. Anne-Marie, anything that you wanted to add?
No, just to reiterate that all the reports for the valuations and research are on the Early Action Together website, so go and check those out.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much, everybody, for staying with us, and I hope you enjoyed our presentation and all the information that we were able to pass over. We're really proud of the work we do here in Wales, and I'm sure that came across. So enjoy the rest of the conference and look forward to catching up with some of you perhaps in some of the other sessions. Thanks ever so much, everyone. Bye-bye.